Katy Faust is founder and president of Them Before Us, a global movement defending children's right to their mother and father. She publishes, speaks, and testifies widely on why marriage and family are matters of justice for children. Her articles have appeared in Newsweek, USA Today, The Federalist, Public Disclosure, World Magazine, The Daily Signal, The Washington Examiner, The American Mind, and The American Conservative. She is on the advisory board for the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. Katy helped design the teen edition of Canavox, which studies sex, marriage, and relationships from a natural law perspective. She detailed her philosophy of worldview transmission in her book, Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City. Her third book, Pro-Child Politics, was published September 2024. She and her husband are raising their 4 children in Seattle. If you were here last year, Katy sat on our panel. We are so excited to welcome her back this year. Please give her a warm welcome.
Perfect.
You want to walk?
No, I'm going to walk.
Okay.
Great to be with you guys today. Thank you so much for coming. Anybody doing a Bible reading plan this year? Like going through the Bible in a year, that kind of thing? Anybody? No? I have a Bible reading plan. I'm at the end of it. It's the 30-day shred. I'm reading the entire Bible in 30 days, and I'm on day 30. Right now. I know, crazy. So it's been fascinating because I am a Bible junkie. Like, I'm an addict. I try to read the Bible with everybody that I'm with. I try to start my day out with scripture. I love it. And when somebody challenged me to do the 30-day shred, which is pretty much me listening at 2.0 speed all throughout the day whenever I don't have a meeting or something else that I need to be listening to or my kid's home or whatever, I was like, how much am I really going to get out of the Bible listening to it at 2.0 speed, going through 45 chapters a day? And I was surprised because there were so many themes that jumped out at me, and seeing the whole thing together in one cohesive package, and then getting to Matthew, finally, and then it was like a sonic boom after sonic boom of like Old Testament references, and I'm like, I just read that 2 days ago. I read that a week ago. It was amazing to see the whole thing together. But I will tell you what stood out to me in the first 5 books of the Bible, especially, and it was that God made very clear distinctions. He made so many different lines that we are not allowed to cross. Do not cross life and death, okay? We don't talk to the dead. We don't, Do not mix humans and animals. Do not mix sexual love with familial love. Do not mix the holy and the profane. Do not blur the lines between male and female. Choose life or death. There were so many distinctions that God made. He set down his holy law before the people even went into the promised land, because he said, I want you to live differently, and I want you to be very, very clear about what representing a holy God looks like. And then he warned them. He warned them about what they would face when they moved into Canaan, and what it is that they were going to have to challenge. And that was mainly idolatrous practices. And then he lists some of the idolatrous practices. And he calls them detestable. So many of the things that God said, watch out for that, avoid it, destroy it, tear it down, don't mix with it, he calls detestable. Now, that's a word we don't use a lot. Anybody want to shout out what detestable means today? Like, what's a word that describes detestable in our 2025 English? What would it be? You got to be louder.
Vile.
Vile? Girl. 100 heaven points for you. Okay? What else?
Abomination.
Okay, an abomination, a word we don't use a whole lot anymore, but yes, that's right. Anybody else? Gross. Yeah, there's really a sickening kind of revulsion, nausea aspect to it. Anything else?
Offensive.
Offensive? Okay, good. So that is all true. And you heard it over and over and over, like those first 2 or 3 days of going through the shred. It was like detestable, detestable, detestable. And so I asked ChatGPT, and I said, hey, according to major conservative Old Testament scholars, both Christian and Jewish, what makes something detestable to the Lord? And it gave me 3 main points. Number 1, something was detestable if it was destructive to the moral or social fabric of society. Okay, so the detestable things that God says, avoid, tear down, don't imitate, was all things that really destroyed in some way the moral or the social fabric of the nation of Israel. The second thing that made something detestable was it was a violation of God's holiness. And there's something about those separations, those separated categories, that God says, holy, unholy, sacred, profane. Don't mix the two. And the third thing that made something detestable is it was a violation of human dignity. That if it violates human dignity, it is detestable to God. It's vile, it's offensive, it's nauseating. So then he tells them, okay, you're going to go into Canaan. You are going to drive those people out. You are not going to be like them. And there's 3 specific kinds of detestable idolatry that you need to watch out for. Number 1 was Molech. Anybody know what Molech was? Raise your hand if you've heard of Molech before. All right. Somebody tell me, what do you know about Molech? Child sacrifice. Okay. What kind of form did he take? Anybody know? What? Okay, good. So he's depicted as a bull or sometime as a man, but mainly this was the masculine depiction of the deity, right? Strength. You come and you sacrifice to him so he can give you prosperity or strength or victory. What did he require? Babies. Dead babies. Dead babies to advance the desires of adults. That's what Molech was. And, you know, he was depicted like cast iron bronze, sometimes with an open, hollow belly, fueled with fire. And then they would put the babies inside the fire or in his outstretched, blazing arms to die. And very often, there were drums, loud, loud drums beating to drown out the screams of the children. And God said, detestable. Never, never should my people ever sacrifice their children to Molech. There were laws saying, you sacrifice to Molech, you're put to death. You kill a baby so you can advance your own desires, put to death. And then if you don't report somebody who killed their baby, you're going to be ostracized from the community. So there was no toleration for child sacrifice. That was idol number 1 that they were supposed to watch out for. Idol number 2, Asherah. Anybody heard of Asherah? Raise your hand if you've heard of like Asherah, Asherah poles, fertility poles. Okay, good. Anybody know what's Asherah all about? You with the hand up. Way to go. What was it? There was a lot of sexual immorality going on. What else?
Fertility.
Fertility. Anything else? Yeah, that's right. Yes, you. Okay, good. Because it has to do with fertility, production, reproduction, right? So if Molech is sort of the masculine deity personified, Asherah was sort of the feminine, the matriarch, the fertility, the reproduction. You go to her if you want babies. You go to her if you need rain on your crops, right? It is a production, it is a reproduction image. And these poles would be put up very often in high places or even near the temple, unfortunately. And people would worship Asherah, the feminine deity. And that was called fertility rites, R-I-T-E-S. Right, a ritual that you go through to spurn on your version of fertility. So the third version of idolatry that God specifically said, have no part of this, reject it, was sexual rites. Not R-I-G-H-T-S, sexual R-I-T-E-S. all of the different rituals, the sexual rituals that were emblematic of the Canaanite gods and worship cycles. And so what did those sexual rites include? A lot of cult prostitution, male and female, a lot of public displays of distorted sexuality, a lot of group orgies. Incest was a big part of it. Homosexuality was a big part of it. So these were the three things that God said, I want you to tear them down. Child sacrifice, fertility rites, sexual rites, rites. Now, all of them then had a direct connection with the harm to children. All of them. Because that's what happens when you operate outside of the boundaries of God's good design for sex and marriage and morality. But what was fascinating to me when I was doing my 30-day shred was these are the exact gods that we are dealing with today. And today, I would say they even have a more direct connection with child rights, child protection, and child well-being. So let's talk about modern-day Molech. So what are some of the ways that we are seeing child sacrifice take place in our culture today? Abortion. How many babies lose their life to the god of Molech in the form of abortion each year? Guesses? Let's just say in this country. 800,000? Mm-hmm. Any other guesses? 800,000, 1 million, according to Guttmacher, as far as I know. But we don't know exactly because right now, people aren't necessarily going to clinics for it, right? They're having chemical abortions mailed to their homes, oftentimes without the supervision of a doctor. So probably somewhere around 1 million children lose their lives to our modern-day Molech. Why? Well, largely because they want to advance their own self-interest, right? And the child gets in the way. Any other ways that children are losing their lives to Molech, where we are seeing child sacrifice take place in our country?
Human trafficking.
Oh, girl, yes, that is for real, for sure. Yes?
The mutilation of children through transgenderism.
Good. So I would say that may not be a right to life issue, but it is a right to an intact, unmedicalized body. Children should not be experimented on. Their bodies are not an obstacle to their true selves. Our bodies are our true selves. Any other area where children are losing their lives in this country? Yes? Gun violence, okay. There's problems all across this country in terms of violent crime. Interesting that gun ownership hasn't changed a whole lot over the last, percentage of gun ownership hasn't changed a whole lot over the last couple decades, and yet gun violence is up. And I would say it very directly corresponds with broken homes, children who grew up without fathers. In fact, it's hard to find a mass shooter who had a close, loving relationship with his dad, right? Yes? You got to speak louder, baby. Okay. Child slavery, human trafficking, 100%. Yes? Okay, IVF. So this is the other area where we see children at their most vulnerable sacrificed to the god of Molech. So similar to chemical abortions, it's very, very hard to know exactly how many children lose their lives in the baby making industry, because fertility clinics, fertility doctors, they're not required to tell us how many babies they create in the laboratory, what they do with those children. But our best guess is probably 4.1 million children are created in a petri dish every year. And what does that mean? What does it mean when you stick sperm into an egg or allow sperm and egg to meet on their own in a little glass dish, right? Conception takes place. And what is that? A what? It's a life, right? When sperm and egg come together, whether it's in the womb or out of the womb, we are talking about a tiny human that deserves protection. Somebody that has personhood, somebody that has human rights, and a right to life that we, the strong, need to protect. So we probably make about 4.1 million children, that's our best guess, in a laboratory every year. About 100,000 are born. So probably somewhere around 4 million children lose their lives in the name of making babies. So probably about 4 times the number of lives are lost to the baby making industry versus the baby taking industry. And very often it's the same kind of thing. Obviously, we are heartbroken and we are burdened by people dealing with infertility and longing to be parents because it's such a good impulse. But no amount of adult desire or longing justifies victimizing children, right? We need to protect them. So modern day Molech, I would say, takes 2 forms: the baby taking industry of abortion and the baby making industry of IVF. Now we also have our modern day Asheras, and it's not sexual R-I-T-E-S. I'm sorry, it's not fertility R-I-T-E-S. It's not fertility rights. It's fertility R-I-G-H-T-S. So what you'll see is when people want to talk about reproduction or having children, very often the adults will couch it in the language of rights. Okay, my rights. I have a right. So what are some of those rights that you hear? Yeah. Okay, well, so, boy, you're getting like out there, but yes. No, pornography, right? My nonprofit actually filed an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, in a case that was just heard before the Supreme Court a week and a half ago on age verification laws, where we said, look, you need to make sure that kids can't just stumble upon this hentai porn that looks like a video game but is absolutely graphic and destructive and addictive. You need age verification laws. You know who we're fighting against? The Free Speech Coalition, right? That say, well, we have a right to freedom of expression, which means we shouldn't have any barriers to our pornography at all. So adult rights, yeah. When it comes to abortion, how do they talk about their rights? Yeah. Good. My body, my choice. I have a right to choose, right? That is one major way that they advance abortion, in the name of adult rights. I have a right to choose. There's other rights around sort of the Asherah world as well. The right to reproductive freedom. So that is a way that especially people on the left are advancing access to things like abortion and things like IVF and things like contraception. And not just that they have a right to it, but you need to pay for it. The government needs to pay for it, right? They're couching it as a right. That's a modern day Asherah. A right to parenthood. So this is often taking place state by state, where somebody will say, I have a right to parenthood, even if I'm a single woman or a single man. I have a right to parenthood, even if we're a same-sex couple, right? It's unequal that heterosexual couples can simply have sex and make a baby, and we're disadvantaged, right? We're being discriminated against because we don't have the sperm or the egg or the womb to make our own baby. We have a right to parenthood. So you, the government, needs to fund our IVF, and that violates children's right to life. But what else happens when a same-sex couple let 2 women, for example, use a sperm donor to make a baby? Some children may lose their right to life in the process through IVF, but what else do children lose if they are created through IVF and raised by a same-sex couple? Yeah. Yeah, it's oftentimes the right to stability. What else do they lose? Yeah.
The right to a father?
Yes. They lose a relationship with one of the 2 people to whom they have a natural right. They will grow up motherless or fatherless, but not because of tragedy. They will grow up intentionally motherless or fatherless because some adults said they have a right to parenthood. Now that's false. You don't have a right to acquire a child who's not biologically yours. Children have a right to life and a right to their mother and father. And it is to their rights that all adults must conform. But you'll see, right, this modern day Asherah, the fertility R-I-G-H-T-S, advanced in the name of adult rights. I've seen it in terms of the right to adopt. we'll see same-sex couples say, I have a right to adopt. I want to have children too. So you need to advance this law saying you can't discriminate against me when it comes to adoption. Now, that is a problem because no adult has a right to adopt. My husband and I are adoptive parents. We don't have a right, we did not have a right to our son, right? It's not like somebody, if I say I have a right to an adopted child, that means the child has to be delivered to me. False. Children who have lost their mother or father have a right to be adopted. They are the clients. We exist for them, not the other way around. So this idea, though, that you have a right to adopt would also mean that these children, I would say perhaps even more arguably deserve to have a mother and father, would be denied one or the other in the name of adult rights. We also, at Them Before Us, fight against surrogacy. And there's often, again, the language of, I have a right to surrogacy because I'm a single, double, or triple male couple, or throuple, and we don't have a womb. It's unequal, right, that this heterosexual couple can have a baby. They have sperm, they have egg, and they have womb. We only have sperm. So we have a right to surrogacy. Now, that is a problem. I know that sometimes we think about surrogacy as a sister who's carrying a baby for her sister who had uterine cancer and can't carry her child, but the baby is going to go home with the mom and dad who are both biologically related and there's no money exchanged. That's not typically what surrogacy looks like. What surrogacy is, from a functional standpoint, is on-demand designer babies shipped worldwide. That's what surrogacy really is. Once you disconnect commercially and intentionally children from their mothers, anything goes. And we already have situations of child predators who have acquired surrogate-born children and taken them across borders to be abused. Because people that acquire children through reproductive technologies, especially surrogacy, they don't have to go through any of the screening or the background checks that adoptive parents like me, and probably like some of your parents, had to undergo. It is a modern-day child trafficking technology. And just to be very clear, what surrogacy does is it splits what should be one person, mother, into 3 purchasable and optional women. The genetic mother who contributes the egg. This is the person from whom you get half of your biological identity. If you were raised with your biological mother and father, you probably can see the resemblance of your mom, right, when you look in the mirror. You might be artistic like she is, right? You might have blue eyes like she does. When children grow up, apart from their biological mother or father or both, it is harder for them to form a stable identity. And I say this as an adoptive mom who used to be the assistant director of the largest Chinese adoption agency in the world. One of the reasons why we have had such a dramatic shift in adoption best practice is because we recognize that children need as many connections as possible with their first family, even if they can't be raised by them. So back in 1960 or so, that's when adoption really started to explode in this country. And the majority of those adoptions were closed adoption. Do you guys know what I mean when I say a closed? What's a closed adoption? What does that mean? What do you think?
They don't know who their parents are. They have no connection to their biological.
Good. No connection with their biological parents, maybe no knowledge, maybe they don't know the identity. For real, 1,000 children's rights points. Good job. So that was the norm. People would say, well, it doesn't matter. I mean, doctors, adoption lawyers would say, it doesn't matter if they know their biological parents. It might be better if they don't. All they need is love. You're going to be able to wipe away every question that they have. You don't even need to tell them that they're adopted sometimes. So that has drastically shifted. Do you know today what percentage of adoptions are closed adoptions in the United States? What percentage are closed, where the child has no information about their first family or their mother or father? Any guesses? 10, good guess. What else? You. 1%. Ooh. Okay, we're getting down to the wire. You. 24. Got some precision. The answer is 5%. The vast majority, did you say it? Boy, you got to speak up. You got to get in there. Okay, next time. Why is that? Why is it that 95% of adoptions today have some kind of knowledge, relationship with, or information about their birth family, even if they can't be raised by them, even if maybe that first family is a little bit risky? Why do you think that is? Well, safety, they can't be raised by them, but why do you think that we have shifted to open adoptions where the child has information about their first family? You.
The child wants to know as they get older.
The child wants to know. The child longs to know. The child deserves to know. The child has a right to know. And so what we've seen is social workers and adoptees themselves say, this is better for me. Why? Because, especially when it comes to identity formation, it is very hard for kids to answer the question, who am I? If they can't answer the question, whose am I? If you grow up without your mother or father, maybe your dad abandoned you, there might be a lot of questions inside of you saying, who am I? Who is he? Why doesn't he love me? Why doesn't he want me? Am I worth anything? It's very hard to answer those existential questions without your mother and father in your life. And that is one reason why we've seen a drastic change in adoption. So what surrogacy is it's the intentional severing, very often, of the genetic mother, forcing the child into a lot of those identity questions. So that's mother number one, genetic mother. Mother number two is the birth mother, right? The woman with whom you form that critical foundational bond for the first 9.5 months of your existence. And that bond matters. And have you guys, any of you, I don't know, have you ever done any sidewalk counseling at an abortion clinic? Have you ever? Yeah, girl, 1 billion heaven points. Anybody? Yeah? Okay, good. So when you're talking to those women who are considering abortion, you don't say you're going to be a mother. You say, you're already a mother. That baby already knows you. The baby already loves you. You are the baby's entire world. They know your voice, they know your smell. You're going to be the only thing they want the day that they're born. And when children lose that connection with their birth mother, very often it elevates psychological distress. It is only that mother's body that lowers the cortisol levels, the stress hormones in the baby, and takes the baby back to a place where they are able to be soothed. You can start to develop that bond with somebody else, but you're starting from scratch. You're at a 9.5-month deficit. And we already know that adoptees who lose their mother on the day that they are born do struggle with feelings of abandonment throughout life. Not all of them, but many of them. They struggle to form solid, trusting attachments because something primal was disrupted, and that was their connection with the one woman that they knew and loved throughout the first 9.5 months of their life. So surrogacy breaks women up, mothers up, into 3 purchasable and optional women: the genetic mother, who grants the child her biological identity; the birth mother, with whom the child forms that foundational bond; and the third mother is the social mother, the woman who's raising the baby every day, kissing the boo-boos, spreading her feminine love in ways that nurture and soothe babies in ways that men never can, the women who talk to the babies differently, the ones that discipline babies differently, the one that read stories to babies and children differently, the one that actually maximizes child development in ways that male parents don't. So surrogacy says, this one woman that all throughout history has been found in the same person, genetic mother, birth mother, and social mother. We're going to break it up. What do you need? Do you need a birth mother? Do you need a genetic mother? Do you have a social mother? No social mother? We don't care. Just purchase the ones or rent the ones that you don't have. And so children are always going to lose their birth mother through surrogacy. They sometimes lose their genetic mother and their biological identity, and sometimes they go home to a household with no feminine presence at all. They lose all 3 mothers. Now the problem is that none of those mothers are optional to kids. They need all of them. And sometimes children lose one or more to tragedy. And you know what we do? We mourn. My husband's mother died suddenly in a car accident when he was 16. And everybody mourned. Nobody said, "You're so lucky, this is progress." But that's what's happening in surrogacy. We are taking what has all throughout history been regarded as a tragedy, and we are elevating it as progress, when in reality it's an injustice. So the right to surrogacy is another sort of modern day Asherah. By the way, we're going to do questions. I'm going to wrap this up fast because I want questions. So get serious, think about it. I want you to stump me. Okay. So then the sexual rights, not the rights that the people of God faced coming out of Egypt and into the Promised Land. Today we've got sexual rights. Okay, so what are some of those sexual rights? The right to self-identification, the LGBTQ. Now the problem with identifying as LGBTQ, and I would say especially living that way, is once you form a family, that child is going to be missing their mother or father. If you create a family that aligns with a lesbian, a gay, a transgender, a poly, if you're going to create a family around that identity, the children are going to lose. Obviously, we've seen, well, I have a right to love who I want to love. And this was the basis on which we redefined marriage. I have a right to marry. I have a right to marry even if it's somebody of the same sex. Again, children that grow up in a home with two moms or two dads will always be missing their mom or their dad, somebody that's not optional in the life of children. I have a right to happiness. This is actually the basis that pushed through no-fault divorce. The first redefinition of marriage was the removal of the expectation of permanence within marriage. And it was largely heterosexuals who said, I have a right to happiness. My right to happiness is more important than my child's need for their mother and father loving each other every day in the same home. And those children who were affected by divorce suffer. They have diminished outcomes in terms of their physical health, their mental health, their emotional health. Children of divorce find it harder to trust when they're dating. They're less likely to get married. And if they do get married, they're more likely to divorce. So adult right to happiness in the realm of divorce actually costs children their lifelong thriving. And I'm not saying that you can't overcome it. There's tons of people whose parents have divorced, I'm one of them, who figured it out and decided to break the cycle. But man, it increases the barriers, right, between you and health, especially in your relationships. The right to a family. I have a right to found a family, even if you're single, even if you're in a same-sex partnership, even if you're transgender, even if you identify as poly, right? Your right, your sexual feelings are now the basis around which you create a family. The problem is, kids are going to pay the price, right? If you're a single mother or single father by choice, like a lot of people are single mothers because they were the only parent willing to act like an adult. But we also have people who are single mothers or single fathers by choice because they hadn't met Mr. Right or Mrs. Right, and they decided, well, my biological clock is ticking and I want a baby. But that child grows up motherless or fatherless. What's the problem with the same-sex household, as we've said? Those households are always going to be missing the child's mom or dad. What about the polyamorous homes? Well, by definition, a polyamorous home is always going to include somebody who's not the child's mother or father. Maybe it'll be their biological mom and dad and girlfriend or boyfriend or boyfriends. Polyamory is always unrelated adults sharing living spaces with kids, whether it's one night or one lifetime. And what we know is unrelated adults in the home always decrease child outcomes and increase risks of abuse and neglect. And transgender parenting. If you are apparent. I mean, we've got stories on our website of children whose father transitioned to be a female, to be a woman. Those kids feel like their father died. They have to mourn the loss of their dad. You know, the changes in his voice, the feminization surgeries. They have a relationship with somebody, but it's not their father. So all of these things have something in common. All of these rights, they all have something in common. And it is that all of them force the weak to sacrifice for the strong. Anytime you're talking about Molech, Asherah, or these sexual rights, it is always the insistence that children sacrifice for adults. Now that is antithetical to the biblical worldview. I am now almost done with my 30-day shred. I have not encountered one example in all of Scripture, the law, the prophets, the Gospels, the letters, nothing, where God insists that the weak sacrifice for the strong. It is always the other way around. It is always the strong who protect the weak, the strong who sacrifice the weak. We even saw this on a cosmic scale, when the strongest of all, the mightiest of all, the most eternal, took on human form and sacrificed for the weak and the needy, even when they hated him. And God tells us to go and do likewise. So I will finish with this. Like, what was it that God told the Israelites to do when they were entering Canaan, entering the promised land? What did he tell them? What was to be their disposition and their approach to these forms of idolatry? What? Say it again. Eradication. That's point number 3. You get 100 points for getting it right, but out of order. Point number 1 that God told them to do is be holy. That is the answer to our modern day idolatry manifested in child sacrifice, fertility rights, and sexual rights. Be holy. What is holiness? Well, tell me, give me some words for what holiness means. Perfect. Perfect. What else? Set apart. What else? Don't conform. What?
Without flaws.
Without flaw. Good. What else? Holy? Pure. Good. Consecrate yourself. Consecrate yourself. You can make a bowl holy. You can make a person holy. But what you have to do is consecrate yourself, which means set apart for a specific holy use. You are not going to be like them. You are not going to do what they do, say what they say, worship what they worship, follow what they follow. No, you are going to be holy. You're going to be different. You're going to be perfect. You're going to be flawless. You're going to be set apart. By the power of Christ, you can and you must. That is the response to our modern day idolatry, is for you to be holy. Number 2, that God told the people, do not imitate. Don't be like them. There is the temptation for Israel, and as I went through Chronicles and Samuel and Kings, I was like, oh my gosh, he said, don't do this, stop. And yet they couldn't. There is something about being immersed in culture that will always pull you to be like the culture. You have to be on guard for it. The default is to imitate, right? That is the human default, is to conform to the pattern of this world. You must be on guard not to imitate. Recognize what is going on in the world of idolatry, especially as it relates to sexual rights, child sacrifice, fertility rights, and say, I won't be like them. I'm going to reject them. Okay? And when you grow up and you get married and your marriage is going through struggles, you're going to say, I'm going to be holy. I'm going to be set apart. I'm not going to imitate my friends who decided to throw away their 7-year marriage because things got a little bit hard. No, I'm not going to imitate them. Okay? If you are struggling with infertility, no, I'm not going to imitate the world that says, go make 15 babies in a laboratory, grade out 7 of them, keep the other 8, sex select a few of them away, freeze several, implant 1, donate the rest to research. I'm not going to imitate the world. If you experience same-sex attraction, if you experience gender confusion, reject that the world is saying that is the core aspect of your identity. Reject it. Make Christ the core of your identity, right? And then let your feelings and your choices and your behavior conform to that true identity rather than being conformed to your sexual feelings. So there are so many ways where we are going to be pulled towards imitation. And God says, don't do it. And number 3, as the gentleman in black said, the other instruction that God gave for these practices of idolatry that all implicate and all impact the rights and well-being of children is avoid and destroy. We destroy, not people, but we destroy arguments. We destroy everything that would set itself up in the opposition of the Lord. We destroy laws. We want to destroy technologies and practices, cultural narratives that lead to the point where we're making children sacrifice for the sake of adults. We destroy it. Now, that requires a few things. Number 1, it requires that you know more than everybody else about this. Okay? You should be the expert on all things: marriage, family, divorce, reproductive technologies, modern families, abortion, IVF, chemical abortions, surgical abortions, surrogacy. You should know more than anybody else. These are all matters of child protection. And all of them lead to very real suffering for kids. Their loss of life, their loss of their right to their mother and father. It is something that no Christian can tolerate. There is something about Christianity. Every place that Christianity goes, everywhere, it is always connected to the elevation of the rights and well-being of children. Child protection is a hallmark, a guaranteed manifestation of our pure and undefiled religion before God. It is a non-negotiable that you guys defend kids in all of these different areas. It is not just abortion. It is not just marriage. It is anything that implicates children's rights to life, to their mother and father. These are all child well-being issues. And while I do appreciate and recommend being winsome when it comes to people that disagree with us, be the most beautiful person in that conversation. But you draw that red line on forcing kids to sacrifice for adults, and you don't budge. And you destroy any argument, any practice, work to repeal any law that makes kids sacrifice for adults. Okay, questions. I think you guys are going to sit there and you're going to yell, and you're going to yell loud, you.
What about the argument that, like, people being adopted into those, like, same-sex
Mm-hmm.
marriages or single parents are better than, like, a foster home or adoption home?
Good.
It's not great, but it's better.
The question is it better for a child to be raised by 2 loving adoptive fathers than languishing in an orphanage, right? Okay, good. The answer, I would say, is probably yes, okay? Here's the thing. We cannot look at this from the perspective of what do the adults want. We always have to look at it from the perspective of what do children need. And so what do children need? If children have lost their mother and father and they're in an orphanage or they're in a foster home, or the mother is pregnant and she feels like she's unable or unwilling to protect that child's right to life, then we have to find the next most acceptable placement for the child. Because the ideal is for both the father and the mother to conform their lives around one another and the baby, so the baby doesn't lose their right to life or their right to their mother and father. But we live in a fallen world, and both tragedy and selfishness sometimes prevents that from happening. So then what do you do if the child's in the orphanage or foster care or unable to be cared by their parents? Then you have to say, this is not about the adults. This is about the child. The child is the client. It actually doesn't matter what the adults want. It matters what the child needs. So whenever possible, the child needs both a man and a woman in the home, because that maximizes child development and satisfies their longing for maternal and paternal love. Whenever possible, we place the children with relatives so that they don't lose their genetic heritage, their kinship bonds. Whenever possible, we put the child in a married home so they have the stability that marriage provides that nothing else does. Whenever possible, we have to place the child with people who have the financial ability and perhaps the resources to care for the child's special needs. Whenever possible, we place sibling groups together so that children don't lose a relationship with their brothers and sisters for the sake of placement. Now, it is easy, fairly easy to find that when you're placing white, drug-free newborns. It is harder to find that when you're looking at the special needs child who's 5 years old in an orphanage overseas, or the sibling group in foster care that has been through 3 homes already, and their ages are like 5, 7, and 12. So in those situations, you might not be able to find the ideal. Maybe a single parent or maybe a same-sex couple is the best placement, especially if they're able to handle the child's special needs. But you can make that determination in that very slim margin of cases without overhauling and saying mothers and fathers are optional in the life of a child. Does that answer your question? Okay, you.
What is your suggestion for parents who are unable to have children being that IVF is unethical?
Good. What's your suggestion for parents who want to have children if IVF is unethical? So number one of the reasons why we are seeing high rates of infertility right now is not necessarily because people are infertile, but they're having babies too late. Ladies, you have a small window to have children. It is your 20s and your early 30s. Unfortunately, most women especially are waiting until their late 20s to get married, and then they're like, well, let's pay off some debt, let's do some traveling, we'll have kids when we're 35. Okay, that is called a geriatric pregnancy. Like once you're 35, it is very hard for your body to get pregnant. So what is happening right now with infertility is women are spending their primary years when their bodies are wired to make babies, going to grad school or developing a career or traveling the world. And those things are okay. But if you get to choose between when to do marriage and family and career, choose marriage and family first. The career will be there later. Your body may not cooperate later. Gentlemen, you've got a wider window. You can pretty much make babies until you die. Ladies, you can't, right? There is a very real biological clock that you need to align yourself with. And a lot of the reasons why we are seeing an explosion in reproductive technologies is because women especially have rejected their bodily design and instead decided to work against it. For those people that truly do have infertility, right, and they are trying to, they've got an opposite sex partner, they're 26, a lot of the problem is we don't have good fertility care in the sense of diagnosing infertility problems and resolving it. There's a whole genre of medical care called NAPRO technology, natural procreative technologies, because there's dozens of reasons why people can't get pregnant, and you should diagnose and treat that so you can make babies on your own. But the traditional medical establishment doesn't make any money that way. So they filter you into the IVF pipeline, which are very expensive, very low success rates, but keep you coming back as a repeat customer. So number one, resolve the underlying fertility issue. But if you can't, then you need to do hard things on behalf of kids. And that is seek to adopt, but it's not about you, it's about them. So you have to go into it not to complete your family, but because you really want to shoulder the load of a child who's disproportionately burdened. Maybe you need to figure out how to spend those maternal and paternal gifts on your nieces and nephews, right? In other ways, volunteering at church. The reality is, in this fallen world, and every adult in this room, and probably some of the kids, know that sometimes in this world, the answer is no. There's some things that we are going to ask for and long for, even if they're very, very good. And God will say, not on this side of heaven. Sometimes we won't get what we want. But I think that that's a pretty slim case where nothing else works and you're working with your body and you're resolving the medical issues and you're getting healthy so you can get pregnant on your own, or you're finding a way to pull children into your world that need homes. I think it's a very slim group that will literally, God will say, no, not in any sense. Especially if you are getting married and having babies young. Yeah.
I think a lot of pro-choice people make the argument that pro-lifers are sacrificing mothers for
Okay, a lot of pro-churches say that we're sacrificing mothers for babies, right? We value babies more than mothers, maybe. How do we support mothers? I think that the church slays at this. Like, seriously, we get so much crap for like, oh, you only care about the baby in the womb, you don't care about BS. We out-adopt the general public 2 to 1. I mean, every church that I know has some kind of connection with the Pregnancy Resource Center, or offering free babysitting to mothers that had, children and the father bailed on them. So I want to be realistic. Like, I hate it when the people talk trash about the church. I hate it because it's not true. But we do need to support mothers. And if somebody accuses me and like, well, you support babies over mothers, I would say, I do. The babies can't defend themselves. The mother, in 99% of the cases, had some choice and volition as to the situation that she is in, and the baby didn't. Further, adults are made to do hard things, and it's an injustice to transfer that burden from the shoulders of a very strong adult whose choices got them into this situation onto the shoulders of the smallest and weakest among us. So yes, I am prioritizing the kids. That's because the adults can fight for their own rights and kids can't. So that's my answer. Next question. You. Good question. The question is, how do you interact with somebody who has transitioned, gone from male to female or female to male? What do you do? So my answer is, you draw near to them. Okay? You don't just reciprocate relationship, initiate relationship. So this is very, very challenging, okay? Because you have to initiate relationship and draw near to them, even while you will draw the line of, I'm not going to lie, I'm not going to get on board, I am not going to validate this choice, but when they think of me, I want them to think they disagree with everything that I believe, but dang, they love me so much. That's what they should think about when they think about you. Now, this is messy, because there's two neat and clean ways to deal with people that we disagree with, whether it's somebody that is raising, two women who are raising the 9-year-old next to you, or somebody who's transitioning, or, for me, friends that are choosing to get divorced. We all have relationships where, like, I vehemently disagree with the choice that you're making. So you've got two neat and clean and unbiblical options at your disposal. Okay, the first neat and clean option is to cut off your relationship with them completely, and you never have to have any difficult conversations. Neat and easy, okay? The other one is you constantly hammer, you smash them with the truth, and you drive them away. Neat and easy. You don't have to have any hard conversations, okay? So one is holding on to the truth with all your might, and one is holding on to loving the person with all your might. The biblical option is you don't get to choose which one. You do both with all your might. You hold on to the preciousness and worth of the person you disagree with. You hold on to the truth with all your might. That is the messy middle. If you're doing it right, you're going to go, oh my gosh, I don't know what to say right now. This is so messy. Oh God, help me. This happened to me a couple years ago. He's crying to me about his boyfriend breaking up with him and agonizing over it, and he's pouring out his heart to me, and I don't know what to say because I don't think he should be with that guy, but I'm really sad that he's sad, and Lord, please put the words on my mouth. I mean, like, it is messy. Holding fast to truth and being in relationship with people we disagree with. And if it's messy, it's probably biblical. Okay, if you're experiencing mess in your relationships, it's probably because you have rejected both of the neat and clean options that are both unbiblical. Yes?
She has a question.
Give it to me.
So I may have misunderstood your words, or like I'm confused about a few things, but how is IVF a sacrifice of a child's right to life, or how is it unethical? Because I feel like an embryo and a sperm are not children until like they are connected. So how is that a sacrifice of life?
Great question. So what is IVF? In vitro fertilization. So there is sperm banks and there are egg banks. You can access sperm pretty easily. It's easier to get to sperm than eggs. And then you can freeze and you can store that sperm. That is not a human. You can access eggs with much more difficulty, and you can store them in egg banks. Those are not humans. But IVF, in vitro, anybody Latin people, what's vitro mean? Glass. Fertilization. Fertilization that takes place in glass, in a petri dish. So now we're no longer talking about just sperm or just egg. Now we're talking about a fertilized egg, which is a life. So what typically happens with IVF is, let's say that they've got 15 eggs. They put them in a glass, they add a bunch of sperm, and they see which ones fertilize. So let's say you get 12. Let's say there's 12 eggs that are fertilized. Then they allow those eggs to develop for 3 to 5 days, which is a zygote, a tiny human, the earliest stage of human development. All of you guys were once a zygote, okay? It's just that this fertilization has taken place in glass, not in the womb. So then at about 5 days, they start to grade the embryos. They can peel a little bit of cells off the top once they're frozen, perhaps, and do some genetic screening. Is this child going to have any genetic abnormalities? If so, we're going to discard them. Or even before, they can test them. Are they boys? Are they girls? So of those 12 embryos, maybe 8 of them are boys. Like, oh, well, we certainly don't need 8 boys. So they'll discard 4 of them. So now they have 4 girls and 4 boys. Now, let's say that they're like, okay, well, we'll implant 2, a boy and a girl, and put it in the woman's body or a surrogate's body and hope that both of them take. And then we're going to freeze the other 6. We're going to freeze 3 boys and 3 girls. And then let's say that both the boy and the girl take, but the girl embryo twins. So now you've got 3 babies. You've got a triplet pregnancy. Now, IVF pregnancies are by nature high risk, right? More maternal comorbidities with any kind of artificial reproductive technology pregnancy. Whenever you have multiples, that's high risk. When you have triplets, extremely high risk. So in those situations, it will be highly recommended or even pressured to selectively reduce. That means abort between 12 and 20 weeks. So they might say, okay, well, we really just need 1 girl and 1 boy, so we will selectively reduce one of the girls. And then they'll give birth to twins, I hope, probably premature, because IVF very often leads to premature births. Certainly twins are much more likely to be born premature. And then after several years, they're like, okay, now the kids are in preschool, and we could think about going back to get the other 6 or 1 or 2 of them. But now I'm 45 and I'm exhausted, and I don't know if we're ever going to go back and get those kids. So you started with 12 embryos, you got 2 live births, and 10 of them didn't make it. 1 of them twinned, so you had 13 as a result, and 11 didn't make it through the process alive. That's a pretty realistic understanding of how IVF works. So even though you do get 2 incredibly precious children made in the image of God that deserve a right to life and protection, the vast majority of children through that process will not get it. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yeah. So you're saying that because they're fertilized and they're now actual children, but the elimination of them, like, takes away the right to life.
That's exactly right. There's so many different ways that we decide that these lab-made babies should not survive. There's one clinic in California, 90% of their clientele doesn't struggle with infertility. They go to that clinic so they can select all of the different characteristics they want in their children. So sex selection is allowed in the United States. There's a lot of countries that ban it. About 75% of people that pursue IVF take advantage of the sex selection or sex revealing tests. This clinic will do additional kinds of screening and testing. They can actually test to see what the eye color of the child is going to be. And if you want a child with blue eyes, you have 5 different blue eye options, 5 different shades of blue eyes. So if you create 25 embryos and you want a girl with azul eyes, you've got 25 embryos, you've got 2 girls that have that shade of blue. You keep those 2 and you discard the rest. So we are talking about in the millions of embryonic children that are destroyed through IVF every year, not just because of genetic issues, but often because of very superficial characteristics. It's just the designing and discarding of children. That's what IVF is. Michelle, are we done? Okay, but I'm going to be here for another like 20 minutes or so if you guys have additional questions. Thanks, and have a great March.